When it comes to biographical films based on real events, the big question we all ask ourselves after seeing the film is, was that true? What did they make up? For anyone who is familiar with the real Griselda Blanco, they may have a criticism or two about the alterations to the true story in the new Netflix original series, Griselda. But personally, I think Griselda is an excellent TV series, and I think Netflix's alterations to the true story were used wisely to uncover some of the most timeless themes, spiritual symbols, and striking social commentary within the real-life story of Griselda. So we'll discuss this series in 3 sections: the true backstory, the symbolism, and the psychology of Griselda in the spoiler-free analysis. The true backstory. For me to really dive deeply into the themes, psychology, and symbols of the Netflix series, I think it's most important for me to give you some context on who the real Griselda was, and how her upbringing was such an enormous factor in shaping the infamous woman we know her as now. Griselda Blanco Restrepo was born in Cartagena on the north coast of Colombia in 1943. When she was about 3, she and her mother moved to Medellin after her father abandoned them. Very quickly after moving to Medellin, a Colombian civil war arose after a sudden assassination and rioting between liberal and conservative Colombia. The war was called La Violencia because of how extremely brutal and violent it was. Because of this environment, rampant with crime, and being raised by an abusive mother, Griselda learned to survive as a criminal herself. She fled her mother at age 13 and soon met her first partner, Carlos Trillo. Together, they forged documents to smuggle Colombians to the United States, and they eventually had 3 kids. These are the 3 sons we see in the series. Approaching the end of the 1960s, Carlos Trillo passed away, which some say was due to liver failure, but others say it was by the hand of Griselda. And this is where she earned the famous nickname, the Black Widow, which is a nickname you'll feel is more and more suiting as this section goes along. About a year after Trillo's death, Griselda met Alberto Bravo, a dealer who smuggled cocaine from Colombia to New York. This is where Griselda developed a strategy of smuggling cocaine through women's bras, earning millions of dollars every week. Something we actually see Griselda do again later on in the timeline in the series. When Griselda felt the police were catching on to her in New York, she returned to Colombia and tried to infiltrate the territory of the now well-established Pablo Escobar. But she struggled with how solidified his position was in the country. And when Griselda suspected Bravo may have been disloyal to her romantically and professionally, Griselda had a violent breakup with him and moved to the States to try and establish her own criminal underworld in Miami, Florida. And this is where the Netflix series begins. So let's dive into how Netflix takes over the character of Griselda and which specific symbols are used to capture the major themes in the next section of this video. The symbolism. At many moments throughout the series, we see this photo of Griselda as a child in Colombia. This is an image Griselda often looks at before and after her most cruel and ruthless actions and orders. It represents the theme of the loss of innocence, the harmless, peaceful child she will never be again. Both because of the crime and chaos she couldn't escape in Colombia, and the world of crime she sinks deeper and deeper into in Miami. And this continuous loss of innocence will inevitably affect and happen to her close friends, her accomplices, and most importantly, her 3 children. However, the reason why Griselda is so reluctant to turn back to this path of peace and innocence is because she knows what this girl has suffered. She had nothing, and she was terribly vulnerable. In Griselda's eyes, the woman she's becoming has power, possessions, freedom, and protection. Even the simplest of necessities she couldn't dream of having in this photo. Griselda's 3 sons are aware of this freedom versus innocence dilemma as well, which is most apparent when we see Hubert's vision slowly focus on the painting of the beach horizon and palm trees, a symbol of peace and freedom as he decides in that moment whether to surrender or to fight for his life. And as Griselda rises through the ranks of this criminal underworld, she seems to develop somewhat of a godlike presence and status. She's often able to escape the slimmest situations with her life. She develops a strong, loyal following of women and eventually men as well. And she becomes a figure of guidance for many people who aspire to live out a story like hers, a continuous, colossal rise from rags to riches. And this concept is solidified symbolically by Rivi's keen observation when speaking to her over the phone. It isn't about your rivals or partners, Pablo or Pinesso. It's about the sky holding you down every day of your life. It's as if Rivi believes Griselda is being appointed or protected by a force beyond humanity, God. And this godlike status ties in with the nickname the underworld and the media have created for her, the Godmother. She even signifies the actions of a divine prophet as she outlines her future visually with the smoke of her cigarette, while she speaks about her vision of the future and who she aspires to become. There's also an episode that intermittently cuts back to the visual of a new fish in Griselda's tank that is described by the boys as a new predator to the other fish. And this is of course the same episode where Griselda is establishing her presence as a big player in Miami and the United States. Rivi even has one more insight to note to Griselda when he calls her one more time. He says, "You can see the big cycles of history, Griselda, and you realize that time is not a straight line. It's a continuous cycle that doesn't stop. Very few can break the cycle." Rivi's pivotal words indicate the cyclical nature of crime and criminal affiliation. The pain and suffering of everyone involved and affiliated will never stop, and only those who are benefiting at the very top of it all have a hand in putting an end to it. But it's never that easy. They must resist their superficial temptations and completely release the addictive lifestyle that created this cycle in the first place. And this is Griselda's ultimate dilemma of the entire series. So let's discuss the psychology of this temptation and addiction as we dive into the deepest themes of the series in the final section of this video. The psychology. Throughout the history of film and throughout real history, we've seen and heard of countless rise and fall stories about criminals who have become addicted to their illegal profession. Whether you're a kleptomaniac who just can't resist to shoplift one more time, a quick learning beginner in credit card fraud, an ambitious broker building his business through money laundering, or a cocaine kingpin, you just can't seem to let it go when you know it's just about time. This addiction is very clearly an issue in the show Griselda. And for Griselda and some of the other characters referenced before, we're witnessing a combination between two very prevalent addictions in society: addiction to crime and addiction to entrepreneurship. And let's talk about them both. In the first episode, when Griselda arrives in Miami with just 1 kilo of cocaine, she agrees with herself that it will be the very last thing she sells illegally, as she is eager to start a new, righteous, safe life in the United States. However, as you could very easily predict, it isn't the last kilo she sells. It's the first of many, many more, as she falls in love with the hustle of building status, respect, and exponential financial growth. An article in Psychology Today concludes that one's addiction to crime can actually psychologically match the uplifting and euphoric feeling of illegal drug use, especially when the person realizes they're getting good at it. Entrepreneurial addiction begins with strikingly similar alluring highs and lows of gambling addiction, and the rush that comes along with a big win. Entrepreneurs can very easily become addicted to the long nights and early mornings, pushing and pushing towards the next big venture or the next major deal. It always feels right around the corner. We become so tempted by entrepreneurial success that we put more and more on the line. Another article in Psychology Today, specifically on entrepreneurial addiction, highlights that entrepreneurs may neglect their closest friends and family since they are second priority to the business. They may experience sudden negative emotions because of the weight of what hangs in the balance, and may attach their financial success to their own self-worth, which is easily the most significant symptom for Griselda. Griselda is deeply fulfilled by the title of the godmother. It's an enormous symbol of status, respect, and recognition that she very clearly has earned. The prestige and acknowledgement can't just be abandoned after all this time of creating it, especially as a woman in this line of work. And on that note of the ambitious female underdog, it's very clear that June is a subtle reflection of Griselda. Most interestingly, they are each both the protagonist and antagonist of the same story, and they both struggle with the same battle of progressing their passion-filled careers in a field where they are doubted by their peers, yet also doing what's best for their families as single mothers. June is a reminder to us of Griselda's humanity, a woman forgotten as a mother to her children, yet a woman revered as a god amongst men.